Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 14th of December 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by Alex Thomson with Eastern Approaches. And of course, Alex will be reporting on matters European, being based in Holland. And also we have David Scott, who's going to be reporting from north of the border with Northern Exposure. Well, weather, I think Holland gets the prize today because apparently there's some sunshine there. North of the border seems overcast, but generally not too bad. And then we've got mixed reports across UK, but I think most people saying grey and slightly chilly, which is probably the political climate at the moment.
Alex, I thought we would start off with this one. Oliver Hart, the economist, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, talking about the euro, talking about the European Union in general, saying that Brussels has gone too far in centralising power. It's got to decentralise, give power back to the nations. He said if it abandons the trend of centralisation, the EU could survive and flourish, otherwise it could fail. He said that the 28 member states are not sufficiently homogenous and that to be considered one entity, and trying to tie them into one entity was an error. And he said that really the euro was a mistake. What did you make of these comments?
I thought they were very perceptive and accurate. And it's interesting, Mike, that we have to look to a Spanish write-up to find it. A write-up apparently between EuroFE and Euractiv, which is more read on the continent than it is in Britain. But the Spanish journalists who wrote it up didn't try to knock it. They didn't explicitly mention that Spain has a particular problem with centralisation versus decentralisation, but that's what's going on here, because Hart has highlighted something that threatens even some of the nation states like Spain, which is, if you've got prosperous regions putting into the budget like Catalonia with nationalist sentiment rising, and at the same time you've got these agrarian regions like Extremadura that are a drain on the budget with different cultures. How do you marry them together, let alone at European level? I mean, when you sent me this, I had to think about how long previous attempts to unite Europe lasted, and Mr. Hart is quite right. There have only been two since the Roman Empire, which was the forced imposition of Pax Romana. Napoleon had less than 20 years with the continents united, and Hitler had only 4. And even both of them had to include legions of local collaborationists and pay them well. And give them privileges in order to keep the project together. So I think Hart's really onto something economically here, that the project is too diverse, and now we've got the former communist bloc in as well. It's not going to last any length of time really worth speaking of now.
Well, David, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but I mean, what have you got any thoughts on the position that he's taking?
Well, what struck me is there's no solutions on offer. He made a little bit of comment about regionalism and local rule and local government, but there was nothing that formed a coherent alternative. So it does seem that he's seeing the end of the project. As Alex points out there, the only time this has ever succeeded is under a military strongman.
Well, indeed. Well, look, last week we mentioned, or earlier in the week, we mentioned the EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, which was attended by Alan Duncan, and Federica Mogherini was giving the press conference afterwards, and she had this to say on screen. First of all, Africa, she said, we've decided, that is the EU Foreign Affairs Council, have decided to increase our engagement with all of Africa on many different strands of work, really investing in a partnership that is strategic for us Europeans. So it's only strategic for the Europeans, but there you go. Anyway, she went on to say, and next year it will be for the European Union an African year, with a summit coming up in November and the G20 German presidency and the G7 Italian presidency focusing on Africa. Well, yesterday there was a press conference held because, as she said, Germany is holding the president of the G20, and at the press conference was Barbara Hendricks, who's the German Environment Minister, Johanna Wanka, who's Science and Technology Minister, and they have teamed up with the Pope's chief copperphile, am I allowed to say that, Hans Joachim Schellenberger, and also with Dirk Messner of the WBGU, which is the sort of the Scientific Advisory Council for global environmental change, and they gave a press conference, as I say, in Berlin yesterday. And they're saying that basically we've got to decarbonize the G20 economies by 2050. Actually, the document itself, here's the document that they released as a result of the press conference. They're calling it a great transformation. They're saying it's the four big I's, and the four big I's are innovations, infrastructure, investments, and inclusion. And they're basically telling us we've got to transform. I'm not quite sure what we've got to transform into, but it's got to be decarbonizing. And because the carbon dioxide budget of the Earth is going to be used up in less than 20 years. They say that people have lost their love for globalization, and therefore they have to make a new offer to the people to create a new, more modern narrative. And that could be advertised as a jobs engine. It could be advertised as a project for modernization. It could be advertised as stability, justice, and peace. And so again, they're echoing the rhetoric of Theresa May and Mark Carney in saying that people have lost their love for globalization, so we're going to do certain things to deal with it. But the message here, Alex, to me, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, the message to me is that decarbonization probably means depopulation.
That is definitely what it means. And when you couple it with the focus on Africa, Mike, we know that it's eugenicists and Euro supremacy plans that go back a long way, 150 years in some cases. And the whole point of them is the fear that Africa, which is really coming true in this generation, is going to realize the population potential of its fertile and extensive land, which has never happened before because of the ravages of disease and war. And of course, the Africans, and for that matter, the Asians, the Indians and Southeast Asians, cannot be allowed to develop themselves because they will consume too much energy. And as we were saying in the chat room yesterday, gold, which they're not being allowed to buy anymore. So there's some real whip hands being held here over Africa. When you quoted Mogherini there saying that herself, an Italian and former communist, saying that 2017 is Europe's year of focus on Africa, with German and Italian presidents is looking hard at Africa, I thought of 1936.
Yes, well, but Alex, the irony here is it not, that when you allow countries to develop, actually population growth reduces, because instead of having 13 or 14 or 15 children in a family, you have 2.
Well, absolutely. This is one of the big drivers. Nigel Farage was saying on Question Time, and not just him, but I pick him as an example, that nobody has worked out what to do about paying pensions in 50 years' time. And the answer is, to keep having children, but at a sensible rate, so that you've actually got people coming on stream to pay for the future. And we're not even bothering to replace ourselves as a population in Europe. And then we, of course, blame immigrants or competition from other parts of the world. But you have to balance that against the fact that, of course, medicine and technology really only being applied to the non-European and American world for the first time in this generation. They will, of course, ensure that lots of people don't have to be born, as it were, superfluously or unwanted, because they won't die in childbirth. So mechanisms exist in the population to stabilise without the horrendous ideas of Thomas Malthus, who, by the way, had Anglican forebears who actually planned population control before it even became a theme on the continent.
David, any thoughts?
Oh, too many for the time we've got. The nature of the global warming hypothesis just provides endless amusement for us all. I saw in the last week that Lord Christopher Monckton has claimed to have found a mathematical flaw in the very first underpinning analysis of all the global warming predictions. He's trying to publish this in a peer-reviewed journal at the moment, so we'll keep an eye on that one. I love the fact that they're now admitting it's a narrative. And I'm delighted that we now want a new narrative that is going to make it a jobs engine. Now, this reminds me of the famous virtual railroad. There was a case in America where there was 2 railroads and they met at opposite sides of the town and they couldn't join them, and there was a whole flurry of lorries going back and forward, and huge numbers of people employed unloading one train, loading the lorries, shipping it across town, and reversing the process. And when someone wanted to join up the railway, people said, well, think of the jobs. And the answer was, well, what we should have is a virtual railroad, no tracks, no trains, just a stream of people unloading and loading lorries. Think of the jobs. what this is an argument is to try to persuade people, fool people, that inefficiency is the way to run an economy, because think of the jobs. It is just another folly.
Well, indeed. Sorry, just ask you about this as well, David, because what they're saying is that people are disenfranchised with globalism, so we've got to present a narrative, and it really pushes home the idea that these people are no longer representing the people; they're representing the policy to the people, and it's a reversal of their job spec, really.
This is a very good point. We're seeing this. We're seeing it in the NHS as well, that the people have to modify their behaviour to suit the policy, because the policy is everything. And the people who are allegedly served, they're just the problem. They have to be modified. They're not thinking right.
Yes.
Well, if I could just add with a smile on my face, if we're to be modified, of course, if we're to believe the rhetoric, the reindeers are being modified and are shrinking. And so I just wanted to say, are you having a problem in Scotland with shrinking reindeer?
Not that I've noticed. We've got a lot of red deer, and there are some reindeer. I spotted some in a mountain and thought I would creep up and get a photograph, only to find they were completely tame and they would walk right up to you and get patted. But they were quite large.
They were quite large. Okay, thank you for that. Well, let's get on to some more serious news, and that is that Exeter's very own Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw, has said that, in his opinion, it was those nasty Russians that were manipulating the British Brexit vote. So this is what he had to say. He said, Russian hackers probably swayed the EU referendum vote in favour of Brexit. I don't think we've even begun to wake up to what Russia is doing when it comes to cyber warfare. Not only their interference now proven in the American presidential campaign, probably in our own referendum last year. So I'd just like to label this quality fake news. We should remember, of course, that Ben Bradshaw was a BBC reporter, so well qualified for this sort of rhetoric. But he was also the man who was Radio 4 in 1989, where he claimed that the Berlin Wall came down and those nasty Russians disappeared, completely disappeared.
Well, what can we say? It does amuse me somewhat that not only have the Russians had time to hack the US election, but they've also clearly been busy here as well. But Alex, in consortium news here, a bunch of United States intelligence veterans, well, they've got together to create an organization called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And on the steering committee are the likes of William Binney, who was technical director for the NSA, Michael Gravel, an adjutant, top secret control officer at the Communications Intelligence Service, Larry Johnson, CIA, Ray McGovern, CIA, and let's see who else we got here, Elizabeth Murray, who's CIA, and Kurt Wiebe, former senior analyst at the NSA. And they're basically saying, look, this is just nuts. They're saying we draw on decades of senior level experience with emphasis on cyber intelligence and security to cut through uninformed, largely partisan fog. We have gone through the various claims about hacking. For us, it's child's play to dismiss them. The email disclosures and questions are the result of a leak, not a hack. All signs point to leaking, not hacking. If hacking were involved, the National Security Agency would know it and know both the sender and the recipient. In short, leaking requires physically removing data on a thumb drive, for example. The only way such data can be copied and removed with no electronic trace of what is left the server via a physical storage device. And so they go on. It's an interesting development that security services people are making a public statement like this.
It is, although they're mostly whistleblowers and or retired, but they know that even at the state of knowledge that they had, which is equivalent to mine from 10 years ago in the intelligence agencies, you would have known perfectly well if there was real hacking going on, and as they said, you would know who did it, and that's why even at declassified or unclassified level, governments can say when there really is a foreign state hacker, they will mask it a bit by saying high probability, but what they mean is we know the IP address for certain, the time, the date, etc. Besides, any company or political party or government entity has got decent firewalls these days and is forced sometimes by law and certainly by custom to have them. which means that even the agencies themselves will know and have an internal triggering when these things go on. You have to distinguish between real hacking, which is theft of data while being moved, which is called computer network operations in intelligence agencies, from computer network exploitation, which is just pulling things which are available. And then there's also a third category, which is taking data at rest on the server by physical access, which isn't hacking at all. It's what these professionals just mentioned. That is going in and doing an inside job, and that's what's happened here.
Yeah.
And this is going to cause a big disconnect in the minds of current intelligence agents and officers, because they're going to be asking their chums in the section of the agency that does this hacking monitoring, hey, what about this massive story of the Russians hacking then? And there's several at the moment, aren't there? US politics, Britain, continental elections. And these chums in those sections are going to have to say, no evidence, actually. And I think that will cause a lot of disconnect for all of these guys.
Fascinating to follow that one through. And it's also a fascinating time when the Russians have become the overall bogeymen for everything, that Prince Charles should choose it to have a visit into the Russian Orthodox Cathedral in London. This was over the last couple of days. It might have been yesterday or the day before. I found this whole thing really very, very spooky, that we had Prince Charles, a man who has done nothing to protect children from abuse, being presented with little girls dressed in white, almost like little brides. Encourage people to go and have a look at this Daily Mail article, because there's many other photographs there. But what sort of man is he? Well, let's remind ourselves that he was very keen to get as close as he could to Lady Gaga here. So he was meeting her at the Royal Variety Performance. And what sort of woman is Lady Gaga? Well, here she is in her raw meat dress. Remember that this is Charles, who's representing the nation. And we'll just follow it through, because, of course, a big friend and protege for Lady Gaga is Marina Abramovich. And if you're not familiar with this lady, go online, Google her, and have a look at some of her artwork. This particular picture of her sitting on a pile of bloody bones is one of the less offensive images that I could find. But we've got some pretty unpleasant people now linked through to our royal family. This is a quote from her: "I go to Brazil to look for places of power for the people who have certain energy, the ones who really learn how to take energy from outside and through inside of themselves, transform it and give it back to the ones who don't know how to do that. I'm learning how to move the wind." And James Franco, actor and filmmaker, calls her a deity. I just wanted a label in here that we should remember, of course, that it's Prince Charles who is supposed to be the protector of the faiths. Alex, I'll just throw this at you. There's something very dark and dirty going on with these pop stars and so-called artists that are producing particularly vile and disturbing artwork. Why should Prince Charles want to clutch the hand?
Why should Prince Charles have wanted to clutch Jimmy Savile's hand for 20, 25, 30 years and seek divorce counselling from him? Jimmy Savile was a pop mogul, although not a singer himself, and had nothing to offer. And at the time he got close to the royals, he was already washed out in his career. I was disturbed by his face and his crouching pose there. And on the point of royal Russian Orthodox connections and the respective governors of these churches not being all they're cracked up to be, on my last trip to London, a source showed me a photograph of Prince Michael of Kent, the chief Freemason of Britain and a fluent speaker of Russian and related to the Russian old monarchy, of course, hugging Patriarch Kirill or Cyril of the Russian Orthodox Church in the Grand Lodge of England.
Okay.
All right. David, just very, very quickly, I don't know whether you'd like to add to that, but we're beginning to get a trail of some very deeply disturbing stuff around our establishment, politicians, and, of course, the royal family.
I would simply add that a lot of these people recognise it's a culture war that is the most important war of all, not a political argument. And they're moving the culture. So these people, although it might seem frivolous and pop culture, etc., it is actually very important in terms of moving the mood of the nation.
Yep. Well, okay, that brings us on nicely to what is the truth, what's fake news? And you've picked up on this article here from Truth Revolt that says the mainstream media is dead.
It's a short talk. It's about 15 minutes long. I really encourage people to go and listen to this. It is rather wonderful and it will do your heart good. The best moment of all, right? These people spent a huge amount of money and a huge amount of time convincing the Democratic politicians that they were big money players. Right? They borrowed private jets. They borrowed flash cars. They convinced that the people they were talking to, they had big money to donate, so the people were opening up about what the situation was. And one Democratic Party official looks at, it's all on hidden camera, it's all on buttonhole camera, looks at the investigator and says the decision to put agents provocateurs into Trump rallies so that they could cause trouble and we could film Trump supporters punching them in the face, was taken personally by the candidate. That's by Hillary Clinton. And then he leans forward and looks right into the buttonhole camera and says, keep that to yourself. It's a wonderful moment.
Okay, let's discuss Trump a little bit then, because he, of course, has officially named the chief executive of Exxon, Rex Tillerson, as the Secretary of State. The recommendation for this, I believe they didn't really know each other terribly well before this, so the recommendation came from ex-Defense Secretary Robert Gates and also from Condoleezza Rice, apparently. But everybody's going nuts about it because in the States, because Tillerson is supposedly a friend of Vladimir Putin, pro-Russian, and of course, according to John McCain and others, that's more or less treason. I don't know what Mr. Tillerson's relationship with Vladimir Putin was, said John McCain. But I'll tell you, it's a matter of concern to me. Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bully, and a murderer, and anybody else who describes him as anything else is lying.
Oh.
Wow. So anyway, Marco Rubio then tweeted out, being a friend of Vladimir is not an attribute I'm hoping for from a Secretary of State. Well, what was the Russian position on this? They said, as to the allegations of whether his attitude to the Russian Federation is good or bad, being Secretary of State is very different from leading a company, even a very big one. That was Dmitry Peskov saying that. And of course, Mr. Tillerson suggesting that, or saying that he actually does have a good relationship with the Russians. They know that he means what he says when he says it. So if he says no, they know that'll mean no. And if he says yes, they'll know that he means yes. And I'll just mention one other pick of Trump's before we ask for a little bit of comment. And that is the US ambassador to China, who has been named as Terry Branstad, who is known as apparently one of Xi Jinping's closest friends in the United States. So, David, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it seems like Trump is deliberately choosing people that will not be attempting to enter meetings with the Russians or the Chinese with a gun in their hand.
It does indeed. And when you compare it with the current team, Kerry has been an absolute disgrace. And as for McCain was on BBC Radio in the last 48 hours, and he was talking about Putin's regime, China, and other failed states. He's absolutely delusional. So this all seems a huge improvement on the catastrophic policy we've been following up until, are following up until January.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to Syria then. And, well, just before we mention the Palmyra situation, of course, everything was supposed to be done and dusted in Aleppo yesterday, but buses were brought in to start evacuating people, including the so-called militants. But there was a condition on that, it seems, because what Assad wanted to do was for the militants in surrounding towns and villages to Aleppo to release Syrian Arab Army captives there. That deal seems to have fallen apart, and the fighting has started again in East Aleppo. So it sounds like it's pretty heavy bombardment going on there at the moment. But anyway, in the meantime, as we know, we mentioned yesterday, ISIS seems to be taking control of Palmyra once again. And the Duran here suggesting that Putin is, stating that he had convened a meeting of the Security Council yesterday. He said that participants in the meeting, or they said that participants in the meeting exchanged views on the situation around Palmyra, as well as the advances made by the Syrian army in Aleppo. And they're saying that the senior military and intelligence officers have been given the task of retaking Palmyra. So it looks like that is what is going to happen. Now, of course, Russia thinks that the United States added to the situation in Palmyra due to a ceasefire. And this is Major General Igor Konashenkov, who's a Russian defense spokesman, saying over the past 2 days, militants of the terrorist organization Islamic State launched several attacks on the positions of Syrian troops in the area of Palmyra. The terrorists were pushing ahead from the north, the east, and the south. The attackers numbered more than 5,000. He said that apparently IS militants had gathered around Palmyra, being very certain that combat operations in Raqqa would not resume. So in other words, he's blaming the fact that the US stopped any operations in the Raqqa area as being the sort of situation which permitted this to happen. Alex, have you got any thoughts on the current Syrian situation?
Well, I was in Aleppo just a couple of years before it all kicked off, and I'm delighted to see from Reverend Andrew Ashdown, who's been a guest on this show recently, that the citadel is actually pretty intact and that the Syrians have got the skills, the craftsmanship to restore that. I know that's less important than human life, but Syria is the cradle of human civilization. And it was quite comical almost to read that the West's tame terrorists tried to bore a 200-yard tunnel through the impregnable defences of the citadel, only the Syrian Arab army waiting for them at the other end saying cooey. So it just really caps off a whole episode really of the West not getting its way and screaming and shouting. We've got Western doctors now, in whose pay I don't know, doing very incomplete and unconvincing performances on the mainstream news, saying how dare the Russians bomb these hospitals? If only Putin would talk to Assad and call his dogs of war off. Then they're even saying these things with deadpan delivery and drawling, and they can't even get worked up and fake tears now anymore. And at the other hand, we've got admittedly, Press TV and Russia Today and the like, they're carrying the footage, but footage from Aleppo of these children, jumping for joy, dancing up and down when they're not even aware the cameras are on them. And I think that the Syrian people have never been so united as this. And what happens really to Syria now and to restore the cultural heritage of Syria, some of it's irreplaceable, like the tombs at Palmyra. But the Syrian people have got stronger, as we've heard from Vanessa Beeley. And I think they're actually years ahead of us now in their determination to resist external and internal manipulation. I think they've woken up and leapfrogged us by a generation or two. If only we could learn from their experience.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's move back to the UK. This is, you wanted to highlight this article. It's an editorial. UK visas, yes to radical Islamists, no to Christian archbishops. And related to that is this tweet from saying, on the left is the Archbishop of Homs, who's not allowed into the UK. On the right is Raed Saleh of Al-Qaeda's White Helmets, who just visited the UK. Give us a story here.
Well, this was covered by the Christian press and by Christian organisations first, the Barnabas Funds, and then later by a great blog called Archbishop Cranmer, who's we could call him an angry grassroots Anglican and a very erudite one. It turns out that the Home Office, well, we know that anyway, but under Amber Rudd, under Theresa May, Amber Rudd's predecessor as Home Secretary, what had been the border agency was spun out into two executive agencies. And so UK Visas and Immigration, UKVI, is now a rather questionable outfit, and it's got even more autonomy from the Home Office than before to decide who's likely to, sorry to be crude about it, who's likely to be useful to UK corporate interests, UK PLC, and who isn't. And if you're a big beardy bishop from the Middle East, some ignoramus, well, let's give it the most charitable explanation possible, some ignoramus says, no, sorry, you're going to stay in the country, you're going to overstay your visa. And these are, bishops of Christian congregations that have been in the situation for 2,000 years and are coming. As the Barnabas Fund has pointed out, they have multiple entry visas for Australia and the United States, and yet the Bishop of Mosul in Iraq, which has been flattened as much as Aleppo has by these Western-backed terrorists, is not being allowed into Britain.
Sorry, Alex, this is the Bishop of Mosul, and you just wanted me to show a little bit of video here, because what he's saying is that although a lot of wars have happened in the land of Iraq, we didn't stop praying in our churches. And what you wanted us to, really point out here is that during this interview, he just broke down.
Yes, absolutely. You can see what it is that he's saying. This is the first time in 1,500 years that they've stopped, commemorating the Christian calendar because it's too dangerous. This is something that the Turkish or the Ottoman invasions never managed. The Mongol invasions, incredibly brutal though they were, and all the internecine wars among the Muslims, this Christian community stood its ground. And now, as a result of large amounts of money and weaponry coming in from UK, US, France, Israel, and the Gulf states, to be specific, they're being pushed out. So we have to ask ourselves, who is the worst enemy that Christianity has ever had in its own birth region of the Middle East? Could it be Christendom?
Okay, and so let's look at who's behind this. This is the man, Mark Thomson.
Yes, here he is, and look at his career, even on his Home Office page. He's got UK visa and international an immigration page. His background is commercial with Royal Mail, and he was in charge of the splitting off of Royal Mail from Post Office.
And that went well, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely, it did, and no advance tip-offs there. And I believe we have his email address, don't we? Have you got that up?
I don't have that there. Sorry, Alex.
I will tweet that out then. I'll tweet out his direct email address. If you look at my lower third, my next time it comes up on the screen, that's my Twitter handle, and you can find me there. Because this man, who I'm rather ashamed to share a surname with, needs to be told what his staff are doing, as if he didn't already know.
Well, I suspect he does, because actually, if you look at his LinkedIn page, he says that some of his key skills include leadership and change management and coaching. And so I looked at where he did his coaching qualifications. That was the University of Greenwich, absolutely steeped in common purpose. A number of University of Greenwich staff on the cpaexposed.com list of common purpose graduates. And if you actually read through some of their web pages, it's common purpose this, common purpose that. We've all got to work to a common purpose. So this is clearly where he's coming from.
I'm not surprised to hear that he's parroting the theme of common purpose. All kinds of people these days are talking about a common purpose with lowercase c, lowercase b. The latest I spotted was the MP for South Cambridgeshire, Heidi Allen, a businesswoman who doesn't seem very clued up on politics. And she wants to sit as an MP and become the mayor of the Cambridgeshire new region, or the mayoralty for that new policy, that area. And she says that she's going to work with common purpose to achieve it. And while she says all this, she's doing her NLP gestures. It's very interesting what this common purpose with a lowercase c, lowercase p is all about. It seems to have outgrown common purpose, the organisation.
Absolutely.
We could have a full discussion on that, and probably we should early in the new year, because really it's the onslaught of this malicious form of NLP. But I just wanted to focus people a little bit on Theresa May and her statements on anti-Semitism, because we're seeing a lot of comment and reaction to this. So the Express here with the headline, Theresa May warns in capitals, Britain's facing unacceptable levels of anti-Semitism this year. Well, I thought it was appropriate. We just reminded ourselves of what her own views are. And here she is with Eric Pickles with Je suis Yalf signs on it. So May seeks to reassure Britain's Jewish communities. And I think we have to ask, have we got a biased Prime Minister? But we could also remind people, of course, that David Cameron, soon after he came in, said that his support for Israel was unbreakable. And of course, we said, well, can our Prime Minister have two masters? So I think some questions there. But David, I think you had picked up on this Europal forum here, which is essentially pro-Palestinian. But in this little segment down at the bottom, some very measured comment. It says the definition of anti-Semitism is not contestable. However, as indicated by the Jewish network Free Speech on Israel, of the 11 examples that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance gives to describe what falls under this description, 7 relate not to Jews as Jews, but to the state of Israel and its actions. Just give us just a brief comment on that, please.
It's a huge threat to the freedom of speech in this country when we start branding things hate speech. We see a lot of this. This is simply one example. There is an organisation called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism in the UK that have got extremely close links with Westminster and with the very highest areas of power and influence in this country. And they are influencing policy, and they advocate this definition of anti-Semitism that really is an assault on the freedom of speech. We have to be very careful about this. We must have the minimum restrictions on freedom of speech possible. So anything that involves targeting one group for violence is clearly unlawful in this country, and really always has been. And that doesn't happen because that would get stomped on very quickly. But we're seeing, I know there's one historian in Wales had his computer seized for 6 months and was told he would be charged with anti-Semitism because he was researching areas, historical research, Second World War historical research, that some people didn't want him to research. And this is what you get. It's an assault on liberty. So we have to be quite clear what is anti-Semitism and what is actually controlling the discourse and simply using labels to do it.
Right, thank you for that. And just very quickly, of course, the other part is the influence of organisation. And this is Conservative Friends of Israel clearly boasting with the graphic there that David Cameron is that strong friend of Israel. So we'll just remind this business, who was David Cameron working for, Israel, or was he the Prime Minister of UK? And then we've shown this before. This is Conservative Friends of Israel documentation where all these MPs are involved. So are they serving Israel or are they serving Britain? Sajid Javid, we mentioned yesterday, because he's helping to restructure Britain. So British politicians, well, they support Israel. We've had Francis Maude putting this network of intelligence services and state spying together in partnership with Israel. So this is more of the same. But the comment is, what would the British public be thinking if these allegiances were to Italy or Spain? I think we would have outrage. So we'll probably leave it there, but there are questions to be asked as to what's going on. And I totally agree with the comment that this is taking us into dangerous censorship if we can't have criticism of groups, albeit with boundaries.
Right, Alex, let's look at the behaviour of the UK abroad, and we're pretty short of time now, so we'll move on through these. This article in the Independent, talking about Yemen's Prime Minister accusing the UK of war crimes. I think he's probably quite accurate in that assessment.
Yes, that's all I would say about that. Is we've covered Yemen recently from a number of angles, and go and see what the Prime Minister of Yemen has said. I can't think of a precedent in the whole for a head of government telling Britain that it's committing war crimes, but now it's happened. Yes,
and earlier in the week, or the end of last week, Matthew Rycroft in the United Nations really bitter about the fact that they tried to push through a Security Council amendment, and that had failed. Russia and China had vetoed it, and he was a bit bitter about China's veto. Sorry, he said China's veto is particularly surprising, despite repeated pronouncements against politicization and in favor of dialogue. China has decided to side with Russia, party to this conflict. China then didn't really take terribly well to that.
It didn't, and you can see from the body language here that, I mean, the very normally very restrained Chinese diplomats or any Chinese bureaucrats, he is really, really ticked off. And the interpretation, if you go and look at it on YouTube, is saying, "What right do you have to dictate terms to us?"
And Britain is
poised. It's the scale for P5 negotiations. They often get tense, but this is really off the scale language from the Chinese.
And the Chinese did say that Britain was poisoning the atmosphere of the Security Council. That's pretty strong language.
It is, and you can see that the Chinese permanent representative to the UN can look Rycroft in the eye, and Rycroft can't look him back.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, a quick advert just to remind people that last UK column news will be this Friday, the 16th of December, but we will be back on the 4th of January. We encourage people to stay looking at the website. A reminder that Tom Crawford is going to be in court on Friday. That's in Nottingham, so if you can go along and support him, that would be really excellent. And we're also going to say a big thank you to all the people who've sent donations, letters and cards of concern and support for the Dohertys. Now, we have had some contact with them. And David, just very briefly, before we move on through the news, what can we say about the Doherty situation at the moment?
Well, there's going to be quite a lot of articles coming forward from the UK column. We've been doing a lot of research and investigation in the background, and we've had other families from the area come forward with very useful information. So there will be a whole series of articles that we'll be putting out over the coming weeks or maybe month. As for the Dohertys themselves, well, they're still an island at the moment. They're still stand that the children have been taken into care formally after an enormous delay, and they're obviously very distraught about that. And we don't really know very much more at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. And you were keen just to put this one back on screen again. I apologise because it may offend some of our viewers, but Sherry Blair saying the era of mothers and fathers is over. They should call themselves parents. And I'll pop these up as well because you wanted to comment on the fact that the drive was that the Scottish SFA basically is to have its own child abuse inquiry, and this has come from Mr. Swinney, who said that he would not extend the Scottish Government's inquiry into the abuse of children in care to include football clubs. Instead, the sports governing body should consider setting its own investigation. We've got a massive attack on families and children, which gathers pace, it seems to me.
We certainly do, and this is very strange from Mr. Swinney. We've had this extremely limited inquiry in Scotland, which is going nowhere fast and has been interfered with by the government. But it only concerns children in residential care homes. It doesn't concern anything else. So we've now, thanks to some very brave people who have come forward, discovered that there's been enormous amounts of child sexual abuse in the football world. And Swinney just passed this off to the SFA, told them to have an inquiry, something they probably lack the powers to do. They're going to have a review, a different word from inquiry, and I suspect very much less thorough. Now, I would have to say that our Highland investigation has revealed some information that shows just how thorough this review is likely to be. We had a situation involving a Scottish SFA referee who was also a headmaster and who was reported by the parents of a child for assault on that child. They took this to the SFA, Hugh Dallas, and what they got was an extremely angry and extremely dismissive response from Hugh Dallas, and he then passed all this information on to the referee in question. So I would raise some serious doubts as to whether the SFA have either the credibility, the ability, or indeed the integrity to run any sort of investigation or review on into this subject at all.
Which follows the normal cover-up agenda of the British government, the Scots government, and indeed we can say in Ireland as well. But we'll have to do more on that as a specialist topic in days to come.
Right, Alex, this is the Plymouth Herald here, and the headline is "Lost for Words, Sentencing of Plymouth Czech Slave Gang is Delayed Again Due to Interpreter No-Show." Now, of course, interpreting is your profession these days. What's going on here? This is basically a breakdown of the judicial system because of immigration and differences in language, is that right?
That's it in a nutshell, Mike. And I thought we'd have a recent Plymouth piece to make it personal to us in the UK column. Particularly large numbers of people from Central and Eastern Europe, as well as other parts of the world, are now British residents, or in some cases citizens, but don't have fluent English and require interpreting to get a fair trial. Now, interpreting is a profession, And David Scott, like our other David Ellis, they're both engineers. If I were wanting them to give me a quote, I would not be asking them to specify hourly rates. I would be asking them for the professional fee that they require for their service, and that would be an all-in quotation. That's how we interpreters work, whether we're in courts or in conference centres, because we have to travel, we have to do our research, and we have to block out the day, much like a plumber or a vet would. So if we're off the premises, our own premises, we're not earning money. And so we have to charge for that. Now, you'll see a couple of examples in a moment, but the mega conglomerations who are now hoovering up all the deals to interpret for Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service are claiming to be able to charge by the hour. And as a result, interpreters, who are freelancers, by the way, are going on strike. We've had cases where Sir James Munby was presiding in the Family Court Division over a child custody final hearing between two Slovakian parents, and there had been 7 adjournments or abandonments of the trial of that couple, or sorry, the hearing in the case of that family, because of interpreter pullouts. And Sir James Munby was at his wits' end. We've also had Polish interpreters completely unqualified but happy to take the peanut rates that are on offer now, who turn up in their overalls and baseball caps, and the solicitors say, right, mate, we're going to go down to the cells now, and the Polish interpreter says, what is cell? And that kind of level of detail. We've had interpreters who've said, I'm just here to cover for my wife today. She's on the register, but she's a bit too busy. We even had a lady who managed to register her pet rabbit with no questions asked. That's how bottom scraping these companies are now, that have got the monopoly deals with the courts.
Right, and this is the House of Commons Justice Committee, a paper called Interpreting Translation Services in the Applied Language Solutions Contract.
This was the small company called Applied Language Solutions, which got itself bought up by Capita, well known to us from its other shenanigans in the legal services together with Omnia. But Capita now has an interpreting wing, which was specifically created to buy out these people once they had been awarded the contract, which has just elapsed for 5 years, to do the interpreter provision for the courts and tribunals. By the way, the clues in the names, courts and tribunals. Tribunals are a lesser form of courts, just like inquiries and reviews are not the same thing. Always watch tricks in language here. And so we have here a statistic for, that report, by the way, has the first substantial section of it is called intimidation of witnesses or tampering with witnesses. And that means that the Courts and Tribunal Service, the government, tried to nobble people who had knowledge of how the, interpreters were being browbeaten and told them not to testify. And here we have in the next slide a written question from the Lords, I believe, on how many trials had to be abandoned. Those statistics provided by Her Majesty's government are shocking enough that, something like over 1% of trials had to be abandoned, which, one is too many, simply because you turn up on the day expecting to defend yourself and there's no interpreter provided. And some people are claiming that there's up to 4% of trials at the height of this shenanigans with Capita Applied Language Services. They've now lost the contract. And what you put on screen there briefly, by the way, was just to tell people that there is such a thing as criminal court statistics. Always worth going and checking out that body of information. Not many people know about it. And finally, on this section, we have these, which were provided to me this morning. The source is too afraid to have their own phone numbers and name visible. But this is the kind of peanut jobs that are now being offered. This interpreter in question would have to travel 3 hours each way by train, paying £17.60 for the fare in order to go and do these jobs. And look at what they're being offered.
Sorry, you said the train fare would be £17.60. So
yes.
So when they're getting offered £16.10 for the job, I mean, that's clearly not going to work.
No, but they're quite happy to put people in the database with no quality checks, although this source is a proper interpreter, but there are others who just do it on the side or may not even be legal in the country themselves. And they get offered this kind of peanut rate, as if you could just turn up, start blabbing and then stop again. And the last 2 providers, Capita, ALS, and now the big word, or as we interpreters have come to know them, the pig turd, these 2 companies have got a practice of categorizing the difficulty of hearings as if they were legal or linguistic experts and saying this is only a category C difficulty hearing. We'll send the bottom of the barrel to that one and pay bottom dollar for it. And when you turn up, of course, it might be a very intricate point of English law that's this someone whose day job is a plumber is being asked to interpret for. Why should this concern us? When we interpreters were talking about this on internet forums recently, I said I would cover this on UK Column News, and the reason is that my fellow interpreters in Britain particularly were saying no one in the media has the slightest bit of interest for people getting a fair trial.
Yeah, because that's what it boils down to. These people are not getting a fair trial.
Absolutely, they're not. And I see David wants to come in there.
Yeah, David.
Well, I'll just share with you. I think we have the solution. We have the solution in Glasgow. There was a situation there where a German was up on a road traffic offence, and the interpreter didn't show up, and the court was about to abandon the trial, and the judge said, unless there's anyone in the court who's a German speaker, is there anyone who can assist? And a little Glasgow guy in the balcony put up his hand and said, yeah, I can do that. So he was brought down. He went through the whole rigmarole, being sworn in as an officer of the court. The barrister said to the German, "What is your name?" And the little Glaswegian said, "What is your name?" He was fined £50 for contempt of court. He got his photograph on the front page of the Glasgow Herald with both thumbs up, and said it was money well spent.
Excellent, good stuff.
Well, we're smiling, but of course it's a very serious subject, isn't it? Justice really has broken down. Well, it's been deliberately broken down in UK, and hence the need for the Winchester British Constitution Group Conference. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. We've covered a lot of ground, very important points. Thank you for that. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's news. I'll just say to people, thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for the Christmas cards we've received and donations to the UK column. We do need your ongoing financial support to keep doing what we're doing. And we are so desperately keen to be able to expand what we're doing, because it's obvious to us that our audience really appreciates when we're bringing in new and different people to contribute. All of that involves cost in some way or another. So if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing and/or making a donation to the UK column. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.